All right, Bill, we'll come back again.
Yes, Jane, good to see you.
Yeah. This is so important topic. And, you and I have been working ministry for 20 years. I learned from you and heard about biblical worldview for 20 years. Gradually, the pages, understanding open up. Certainly, because of such big change, in the human history, especially in America, I can see what biblical worldview looks like. But still, there are some important concept that needs to be phrase by phrase, one by one, to really go deeper.
Sure.
That's the whole purpose, right?
Sure.
So today's focus would be knowing the Sons of Issachar.
Sons of Issachar.
Because you mentioned many times, really knowing the time in the history, in the biblical history, in human history, in today's society.
Right.
Today, the whole world is upside down. The American churches and society failed, and many people disappointed because we don't know the time.
We don't understand the
That's
times.
As a result of lack of biblical worldview.
Right, sure.
What is Sons of Issachar? What they know.
Right.
And why it is important and how we're going to develop.
Every human being has a worldview.
Right.
They may not be aware of it, but they look at the world a certain way, and they've collected particular ideas, and they've created a set of lenses, and they see through those lenses, and they interpret the world through the lenses.
And they focus on the problem.
And they're focused on the problem.
Not the cause.
They focus on particulars and not realizing there's really two basic worldviews that are in conflict right now, that are really the major worldviews. And we need to understand that the biblical worldview is always going to be in conflict with any man-made worldview, period. It doesn't matter whether it's identified as religious or whether it's identified as philosophical. That any view of the world that looks around the universe, looks at the stars, looks at the animals, looks at the world, looks at each other, and they want to understand, they think they understand. If the understanding comes from anything other than God's perspective, we've created our own understanding of the world without God. And if we want to understand the world without God, we've rejected God, and the very rejection of God, it's not called philosophy, it's called idolatry.
Wow, there's so many things you touched.
That's right.
But looking at the lenses of whatever man-made worldview, and I said everybody has a blind spot. You say no. Everything is a blind spot. You want to say that again? That was shocking to me.
That's right. It's because what happens in non-biblical worldviews, that there are assumptions that are made that leaves many things that are most important to the human being out of the discussion.
Right.
Somebody that's holding a naturalistic worldview, and let's define naturalism for the viewers. It just means that, sometimes it's used interchangeably with the materialist worldview. Okay, it's materialism, which means that only the physical universe, that matter and energy, that's all that exists. There is no God that existed before the universe.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And so the biblical worldview says God is the ultimate reality. He spoke, and specifically Jesus, as we see from John chapter 1, and also Paul's letter to the church at Colossae, chapter 1, beginning with verse 15, when Paul says that through him and for him and by him, all things were made.
Wow.
Okay? The most powerful two competing worldviews is the view that God exists, he is personal, he spoke the creation into being. Okay, and that he is the one that charges, that fuses into the creation purpose
Right.
and reason and meaning, and that we don't create that on our own. The other worldview says God doesn't exist. We can manage our affairs well without God. Well, there are multiple problems with that. Number one, it's idolatry.
So this is important.
The idea the world can be better for human beings if we use Marxism. And then so many Christians, they go, no. They go, no, we can't be Marxist. We can't be Marxist. And I ask them, well, why? Well, they'll take away our private property. They'll take away our right to free speech. They'll take away our right to defend ourselves, to own a weapon, a firearm. They're going to take all these things away. And I said, is that what's bothering you? And I said, that's not what bothers me. What bothers me is the idolatry, because Marxism is based on the idolatry that says God does not exist. And so if we want to be like the Sons of Issachar, and we have to understand the times and the ideas in which we live so that we know what to do. Because see, those people that are saying, well, we can't go into liberation theology because it's Marxist, or social justice because it's Marxist. They'll say, well, because of the results. So we're going to start a committee to protect our Second Amendment. We're going to start a committee or a movement to start our private property. Those are all symptoms. That would be like temporarily bringing down the temperature of somebody that has an infection on the inside. Bringing down the temperature is good, but it doesn't fix what caused the temperature in the first place. And so to understand the times that Christians and non-Christians as well need to understand exactly what's going on. When I talk about, say, social justice, there are people from a naturalistic worldview, but they were influenced by a Christian worldview of compassion when you begin to spell out for them the history of misery during the 20th century, that the naturalistic, the materialistic worldview degraded the human being with concentration camps and gas chambers and cremating hundreds of thousands of people. It's estimated that in the 20th century, where you and I, we spent half of our life, 100 million people were killed by their governments. Not from crime out on the street, from criminals, running around, jewel thieves and car thieves and that. No. Official governments on this planet, that they were committing the idolatry of naturalism, rejecting God. And if we don't know who God is, we're not going to know who the human being is. I can't understand you unless I understand God. But because I understand who God is, I can understand who you are. But see, in the naturalistic worldview, the human being is reduced to, well, there's enough iron in our body to make one nail. There's enough fat in our body to make 7 bars of soap. So we're reduced only to the material things of our existence, and it ignores the fact that our primary identity is not with the material world. Our primary identity is with God, because He made us in His image and likeness. Okay? This steel here is not made in God's image and likeness. This paper here on the wall, it's not made in God's image. It's all part of the creation. The animals that are here, and I love animals, they are not made in the image and likeness of God. You and I are made in the image and likeness of God, and the materialistic worldview says, God doesn't exist. We're going to redefine who you are, and if you have any purpose for our government, we're going to use you. But the moment you have no purpose, you're a dead human being. And that's the end of you. But you know what? That's not the end of us, because their blinders are on, and all they see is the materialistic worldview. They don't understand the spiritual worldview, that God exists outside the universe, even though He's present with us. But He created, He spoke the universe into being. And so because we understand who He is, we can understand who we are, and because of who he is, a good God, a just God, a loving God, now I know how you and I are supposed to relate. You and I are supposed to relate in goodness and in justice and in love, because we have the understanding of who God is. Any worldview that comes up that says God doesn't exist, or we can have any God, that the human being makes, like, Caesar is God, Pharaoh is God, the president is God, your university professor is God. That when human beings make idols and they see their identity with the idols, they misidentified themselves because they misidentified God.
So in our conversation said this is a spiritual warfare.
Yes.
Explain that why it becomes so severe, and in front of our eyes, society collapse, relationship collapse, and even many severe social symptoms.
Right.
Why is that nationalist worldview? It's not just philosophy. It is more than that.
It's more. The naturalistic worldview is a religion. Okay.
Explain it.
Okay. So for instance, let me give you an example. The word in English, religion, has two parts. The first part starts with re. Okay, and that's called the prefix. And what that means is to do something again. Do something again. Okay. So the main part, the root of the word, the ligon. Okay, that means. The lig, L-I-G, it's like the ligament in your arm, the ligament in your leg, okay? It means to be linked together. So if you have to religament something, it means that it was once ligamented and then it was broken. And when you religament something, you bring it back together. And so when we look at religion, it is religamenting something that's broken. Well, it doesn't matter whether it's Karl Marx or whether it's Stalin or Mao or any dictator, Castro. They look at the world and they go, look at this, look at the pain, look at the poverty, look at the suffering. We need to fix this. Just like fixing, putting it back to the way it's supposed to be. And so when we see those problems in the world, we understand that's not the way it's supposed to be. That's the result of something. Oh, I'm going to fix that, but we don't want God involved. There's poor people in America and in China and former Soviet Union. We're going to fix the poverty problem without God. Well, we know how they did it, in both the Soviet Union and also in Germany and also in China, that, well, if we don't have enough food, supply and demand, well, we can't increase the supply because their economics was all off. It didn't fit reality. So they killed people to reduce the demand, and now we have enough food. Well, what happened to those people that you killed, okay, with artificial famines or, starving them to death in other ways, or just outright, putting them in gas chambers? What about those people? Those people are made in the image and likeness of God. They're not just material things that you can dispose of. And down deep inside, each one of us, we know that. That's the law that's written on our hearts. That's the law that we know down deep inside, because when injustice is done to us, if we've been wronged, we know it. Every human being, I don't want to say victim, but they have experienced injustice, and in some cases they're victims, and they know it, and they go, this is not right. Well, what is that? Well, that's sin. Jesus dealt with this, and in order for people to be reunited with themselves, one to another, from one person to another, for us to be reunited and reintegrated in the creation without the environmental issues, being reintegrated with ourselves. Every human being understands the fracture the emotional pain that we have inside of us that has to be put back. There's no human being that has not had emotional disturbances of some kind. And then there's also the relationship with God, to put the relationship back with God. So what religion does, okay, and I'm not talking all the religions of the world, just the word, is that it religaments me with God. It religaments me with each other. It religaments me with the creation in which the world in which I live, and it puts me back together on the inside. So when Jesus dies on the cross, all this healing begins. It's going to come to its conclusion and fullness, where all things are healed when Jesus returns. So the healing has begun. It won't be complete until Jesus returns. And so what happens is humans, they look at it and they see all the brokenness, see the brokenness inside people. Sigmund Freud, a naturalist, says, oh, well, we don't want God to explain the human being, so we're going to do psychoanalysis right here. Okay? So there's the attempt to heal the person. The environmental movement, because, oh, well, look at all the pollution in the world, and the supposed climate change, and the scientists are divided on that issue. And part of a materialistic worldview and idolatry is that idols don't want the other side to have any time at the microphone. Idols don't want to have the other side to have time on YouTube. That's the cancel culture. See, people say, well, God is a jealous God. Oh yeah? Well, let me tell you, the naturalistic God is even more jealous. So
in that sense, by force and by worshiping those naturalist worldview, it's not just competing a debate idea.
That's right.
It's much more than that. It's a forceful to cancel.
That's right. See, man-made religions, okay, in the end always use coercive force. It doesn't matter whether it's Muslim, it doesn't matter whether it's a naturalistic worldview, an animistic worldview, all the different worldviews that are idolatrous, that they've rejected who God is. They figured out the world all by themselves, and they want everybody to share they want them to agree with them, and they always become coercive, and they impose their view on other people. Christianity, on the other hand, God was free to either make the universe or not. He was free. He made us free, okay? Because we're made in his image and likeness, we have freedom. So when God approaches us, he approaches us person to person, and he makes an offer. He doesn't force anybody. And the reason that God has given every single human being free will is because love is impossible without free will. You see, if my wife was coerced into loving me, it's not love. But you see, because God's is essentially love, that he has to give us free will so that you and I can choose to love him. Right. So God approaches you, Jane, and he says, I love you. Will you love me back? He's made you free to accept him or reject him, And it's the same thing with other people in our sphere of influence. Every human being we encounter, that we could offer them a relationship, and they can accept it or they can reject it. So idolatry is always imposed, okay? But God, whether he's approaching Adam, whether he's approaching Abraham or Noah, see, God didn't make Noah build the ark. It was a new covenant. It was a new proposal. And it was a new offering to love God and to be obedient to God. That the cross, Jesus is on the cross, and that is we are invited. God himself invites us. He makes a proposal. The darkest moments of Christianity is that when Christians, instead of living consistently with the covenant and the offering and the proposal, when they try to force Christianity on people, those are some of the ugliest moments in the history of the church.
Can we say Sons of Issachar is equivalent of understanding biblical worldview. Can we say that?
Oh yeah, because see, the thing is the biblical worldview starts out with the existence of God. The sons of Issachar, they were not confused as to who God was. Okay, and from that flows, I'm not going to kill you, you're not going to kill me, because God made you in the image and likeness, made me the image and likeness. I'm respecting you, I'm loving you, and we're relating to each other as God relates to us in love. And so the sons of Issachar, they understood primarily who God is. That's the number one question. What is self-existent? If God is self-existent and does not need anything to exist, he is ultimate. But the naturalistic worldview pushes that idea aside and says the universe is all there is, all there was, and all there ever will be. That the universe is the material energy universe. That worldview demeans the human being, and it shows up politically, it shows up socially, it shows up economically, it shows up medically, and all those are the results of the idea of rejecting God. And the problem with that is it's not that it's philosophy, it's idolatry.
So what about if we understand the biblical worldview, or if we are, current time, sons of Issachar, what should we do? Besides we understand the Bible, besides we see the problem, the root cause, what should we do?
Okay, that question has multiple answers. One of the things that is the result of the naturalistic worldview displacing the biblical worldview in America, okay, is that when the biblical worldview was pushed aside, that Christianity was put into the category of feelings as opposed to the category of knowing and understanding. Okay? One of the things Christians have to do is that they've got to repent of denigrating worshiping God with our mind. We have to recover that thinking through who is God, what does the Bible mean, how does it fit in the times in which we live, and that thinking is an act of worship. You see? And it doesn't take any guitars or microphones or PA systems. That worshiping God with our mind so that we can understand the times is very important. Mind, body, spirit, and emotion all has to be reintegrated, and that the whole of me is worshiping God. This activity right here, the work that our recording crew, this is all an act of worship. Our whole life is an act of worship to God.
Right.
But thinking things through, Christians have got to recapture the idea that we can worship God, and not only can, but should and are obligated to worship God with our whole mind. And then we can understand the times, and then we'll know what to do.